I never expected that accepting a ride home from a near stranger would completely rewrite my future, but that's exactly what happened when my car died on the wettest Tuesday in October. Life has a funny way of disrupting your most carefully constructed routines, of taking the predictable, grayscale path you've laid for yourself and splashing it with colors you never even knew existed. For me, that disruption, that splash of color, had a name: Caleb. My life, up until that point, was a study in quiet predictability. My name is Lucas. At 27, I was the head archivist at the Northwood Public Library, a job that suited my temperament perfectly. I found comfort in the hushed reverence of the library's lower level, in the scent of aging paper and bookbinding glue. My days were ordered, cataloged, and consistent. I would wake up at 6:30, drink 2 cups of black coffee while reading the news, and drive my sensible, 10-year-old sedan to work. I'd spend 8 hours in the peaceful solitude of the past, and then I would drive home to my small, meticulously tidy apartment to make dinner for one. It wasn't a bad life. It was safe. But there was a low-level hum of loneliness beneath it all, a sense that I was living adjacent to the main event. I watched families come and go from the library, saw teenagers flirting in the stacks, observed the world from behind a pane of glass. I was an observer, a chronicler, not a participant, and I'd made a sort of peace with that. It was easier to protect your heart when you never truly put it in play, wasn't it? Caleb was part of the scenery I observed. He worked at the auto shop directly across the street from the library, a place of loud noises and the sharp smell of gasoline that was the complete antithesis of my own workspace. I'd see him through the library's large front windows, his silhouette moving with an easy, confident grace under the harsh fluorescent lights of the garage. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his dark blue work coveralls, and his arms were a tapestry of intricate tattoos that disappeared under the rolled-up sleeves. He had a presence that was impossible to ignore. His laughter would sometimes carry across the street on a slow afternoon, a deep and genuine sound that always made me look up from whatever historical document I was handling. He had a kind of casual magnetism. Other mechanics and customers were always drawn to him, clapping him on the shoulder, listening intently as he explained something about an engine, his hands moving with practiced certainty. From my distant vantage point, he seemed to belong to a world of effortless sociability, a world I felt completely foreign to. Of course, I noticed he was handsome. It would have been impossible not to. He had dark, unruly hair that he was constantly pushing off his forehead with a grease-stained hand, and a square jaw that was usually shadowed with stubble by the end of the day. But it was his eyes that I noticed most on the rare occasions he came into the library, usually to use the restroom or grab a flyer from the community board. They were a warm, clear hazel, and they seemed to hold a flicker of amusement, as if he were in on a joke the rest of the world hadn't heard yet. I cataloged him the way I cataloged everything else in my life, as an object of distant, harmless appreciation. He was the handsome mechanic from across the street. In my mind, he was filed under unattainable. He was probably straight, probably had a girlfriend, probably lived a life filled with beer, sports, and easy camaraderie. He was everything I wasn't. We existed in different ecosystems, separated by a street that felt as wide as an ocean. Our interactions were limited to a polite nod if we happened to pass each other, a fleeting moment of contact that left me feeling strangely flustered long after he was gone. I was content, or so I told myself, to let that ocean remain between us. That October Tuesday was determined to prove me wrong. The rain had started in the morning as a gentle mist and had escalated throughout the day into a relentless, driving downpour. It hammered against the library's roof and streamed down the large windows, blurring the world outside into a watercolor wash of gray and neon. I stayed late, trying to finish cataloging a new donation of local historical photographs. When I finally packed up my bag, the sky was a bruised purple, and the rain was coming down harder than ever. I remember the feeling of dread that washed over me as I walked to my car, huddled under a small, inadequate umbrella. And then, the inevitable. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. I tried again. Just a sad, pathetic clicking sound, a death rattle. The battery was completely, unequivocally dead. My phone, of course, was also dead. I had forgotten to charge it, a rare oversight in my otherwise organized life. I stood there for a long moment in the drumming rain, the absurdity of the situation sinking in. I was stranded. The bus route to my apartment was notoriously unreliable, especially in this kind of weather. A taxi would take ages to arrive. I felt a familiar wave of anxiety prickle at the back of my neck. It was the feeling of my carefully controlled world suddenly spinning off its axis. I let out a long, frustrated sigh, my breath turning into a white cloud in the cold, damp air. It was then that I saw the lights of the auto shop flicker off. The large bay doors rolled down with a deafening clang. A moment later, a side door opened and Caleb stepped out, pulling the hood of a sweatshirt over his head. He started walking toward a large, dark pickup truck parked nearby, his head ducked against the rain. He was my only hope, and my stomach twisted into a knot at the prospect of having to speak to him, of having to ask for help. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to move. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak against the storm. He didn't hear me. "Excuse me." I tried again, louder this time. He stopped and turned, peering through the deluge. I could barely make out his features in the dim light of the street lamp. He took a few steps in my direction, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise of the rain. I felt a ridiculous blush creep up my neck. I was standing there like a drowned rat, my hair plastered to my forehead, my umbrella offering no real protection. "My car," I said, gesturing vaguely behind me with my thumb. "It won't start. The battery's dead." He walked over and glanced at my car, then back at me, his hazel eyes taking in my pathetic state. I braced myself for a condescending comment, a sigh, some sign of annoyance at being bothered at the end of a long day. Instead, his expression softened. "Yeah, this weather can be tough on an old battery," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "You need a jump?" "I think it's beyond a jump," I admitted. "And my phone is dead, so I can't even call a cab." I hated how helpless I sounded. Caleb looked at me, then at the empty street, then back at me. A long moment passed where the only sound was the relentless pounding of the rain. I was just about to tell him not to worry, that I'd figure something out, when he spoke. "Where do you live?" he asked. I told him the street, about 3 miles away on the other side of town. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He seemed to be weighing his options. I felt a surge of hope so sharp it was almost painful, followed immediately by the certainty that he would say no. "Well," he said finally, "it's no trouble. I can give you a ride home." The offer hung in the air between us, a lifeline. I was so taken aback by the simple kindness of it that I just stood there for a second, speechless. "Really?" I finally managed to say. "You don't have to do that." He gave me a small, lopsided smile, and it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "I know I don't have to," he said, "but it's pouring out, and it's late. Come on, get in before you drown." He gestured toward his truck, a massive black Ford that looked like it could drive through a brick wall. And just like that, the ocean that had always separated us vanished, replaced by the cramped, intimate space of his passenger seat. My routine was broken. My carefully ordered world had been officially disrupted. Climbing into Caleb's truck felt like stepping into another world. The interior was surprisingly clean and smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and something else, a clean, masculine scent that I guessed was just him. The dashboard glowed with a soft blue light, and the rain hammering on the roof created a strange sense of insulation from the storm outside. We were in a small, warm, private bubble. "Thanks again for this," I said, my voice still a little shaky as I clicked my seatbelt into place. "You really saved me." "Don't mention it," he replied, turning the key. The engine roared to life with a deep, satisfying rumble, so different from the pathetic click of my own car. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. "Anyone who works at that library deserves a break. You guys are always so quiet over there." I smiled. "It's a library. It's kind of in the job description." The easy silence that fell between us wasn't awkward, as I had feared it might be. It was comfortable. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the soft hum of the heater filled the space. I stared out the window at the rain-slicked streets, my mind racing. I was in Caleb's truck. The man I had only ever admired from a distance was sitting 2 feet away from me. To my surprise, he was the one who broke the silence. "So, you're the archivist, right?" "Lucas." My head snapped toward him. He knew my name. It was such a small thing, but it sent a jolt through me. "Oh yeah? That's me," I stammered. "How did you know my name?" He shrugged, his eyes fixed on the road. "I asked Martha, the librarian at the main desk, a while back. I saw your name on the little plaque on the archive door." He said it so casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. But my heart was hammering against my ribs. He had asked about me. He had noticed my name. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What did Martha tell you?" A slow smile spread across his face. "She said you were the quiet one who knew where all the old secrets were buried." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that surprised even me. "That's one way to put it," I said. "I mostly deal with old property deeds and family photo albums." "Sounds interesting," he said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. This was the first crack in the facade of the person I had built up in my head. I had imagined him being bored by my quiet, academic world, but he seemed genuinely curious. "It can be," I said, feeling a newfound confidence. "It's like being a detective, but all the mysteries are 100 years old." He glanced at me, a quick, appraising look. "I get that. It's kind of like working on an old engine, taking it apart, figuring out how all the pieces fit together to make it run. Finding the one little thing that's broken and making it whole again." The comparison was so unexpected, so thoughtful, that it threw me for a loop. He wasn't just a gearhead. He saw the poetry in his own work, the same way I saw it in mine. We started talking then, really talking. I asked him about his tattoos, and he told me the story behind a stylized raven on his forearm, a tribute to his late grandfather who had loved Edgar Allan Poe. I was stunned. I had a first edition of The Raven, under lock and key in the library's special collections. He then asked me about the oldest thing I had ever held, and I told him about a vellum manuscript from the 15th century, trying to describe the feeling of touching something that had survived for 600 years. He listened intently, his expression serious, his gaze occasionally flickering from the road to my face. He wasn't just being polite, he was engaged. He was seeing me, Lucas, not just the quiet librarian from across the street. And I was seeing him, Caleb, a man with a hidden depth and a quiet intelligence that his rugged exterior belied. As we got closer to my neighborhood, I pointed out my street. "It's just down here, the third house on the left." I felt a pang of disappointment that the ride was almost over. I wasn't ready for this small, warm world to end. I wasn't ready to go back to my empty apartment. Caleb slowed the truck as we approached my building, a modest 2-story brick structure. But instead of pulling up directly in front, he drove past it and parked about 50 feet down the street, under the dense, dripping branches of a large oak tree. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. The only sound was the soft ticking of the cooling engine and the rain whispering against the windows. He didn't make a move to get out. He just sat there, his hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead into the rain-streaked darkness. My heart started to beat a frantic, irregular rhythm. What was happening? Why had he parked? Why wasn't he saying anything? My mind raced through a dozen possibilities, each one more anxiety-inducing than the last. Maybe his truck had stalled. Maybe he was waiting for the rain to let up. Maybe he regretted giving me a ride and was now trapped in an awkward silence. After what felt like an eternity, he let out a slow breath and turned his body to face me. The dim glow from a distant streetlight illuminated one side of his face, casting the other in shadow. His expression was unreadable, but his hazel eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Lucas," he began, his voice low and a little rough. My own voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah." I was terrified of what he was going to say next, and yet I was desperate to hear it. This was the moment, the turning point. I could feel the very air in the truck crackling with unspoken energy. It was as if the entire world had shrunk down to this single, charged moment inside a parked truck on a rainy night. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he slowly lifted his hand from the steering wheel. I watched, mesmerized, as he reached across the space between us. I thought he might touch my shoulder, or maybe my arm, but his fingers, calloused and warm, came to rest gently on my knee. The touch was electric. It was a simple, small gesture, but it felt monumental. It was a question, an offering, a confession all at once. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked down at his hand on my leg, then back up to his face. His eyes were searching mine, looking for a reaction, for permission, for a sign that he hadn't just made a terrible mistake. He still hadn't said anything more, but in that gesture, 1,000 words were spoken. His voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. He cleared his throat. I don't really want this ride to be over. The words were simple, but they landed with the force of a revelation. He said what I had been feeling. He didn't want it to end either. All the air rushed out of my lungs in a silent whoosh. Hope, terrifying and exhilarating, bloomed in my chest. He wasn't annoyed. He wasn't just being nice. This was something else entirely. I couldn't find my voice to reply, so I just nodded, a small, jerky movement. It felt like my entire life had been leading up to this quiet, rain-soaked moment. The carefully constructed walls I had built around myself began to crumble, not with a crash, but with a quiet, yielding sigh. This was it. This was the turning point. The world I knew had just been irrevocably altered by a single, gentle touch and a handful of whispered words. He finally pulled his hand away, and the absence of his touch was as potent as its presence had been. I should let you go, he said, his voice still low. You're probably tired. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I finally found my voice, though it came out weak and thin. Thank you for the ride, Caleb. Anytime, he said, and his eyes held mine for a moment longer before he turned and restarted the engine. The drive to the front of my apartment building took less than 10 seconds, but it felt like a journey across a vast distance. He pulled up to the curb, and the moment was over. I fumbled with the door handle, my mind a complete blur. Good night, Lucas, he said softly as I stepped out into the rain. Good night, I mumbled, and then I was standing on the sidewalk, watching the red taillights of his truck disappear down the street. I stood there in the rain for a full minute, not even feeling the cold water soaking through my jacket. I replayed the last 5 minutes in my head. The parked car, the silence, his hand on my knee, his words. I don't really want this ride to be over. It felt both impossibly real and like something I had dreamed up. I walked into my apartment building in a daze, my key fumbling in the lock. The silence of my apartment was deafening after the cozy intimacy of his truck. I dropped my bag on the floor and leaned back against the door, my heart still pounding a wild rhythm against my ribs. The next few days were a special kind of torment. A torment fueled by a potent cocktail of hope and paralyzing anxiety. Every time the bell on the library door chimed, my head would snap up, my stomach lurching with a mix of dread and anticipation. I would look across the street at the garage and see him moving around, a familiar silhouette that now felt completely different. He was no longer just the handsome mechanic. He was Caleb, the man who had touched my knee and admitted he didn't want to leave me. Sometimes he would glance over toward the library, and I would quickly look away, my face burning, terrified he would see me watching him. Had I imagined it all? Had I completely misread the situation? That was the question that haunted me, that kept me awake at night. I dissected every single second of that car ride. The way he knew my name, the story about his grandfather, the unexpected thoughtfulness in his comparison of engines and archives, and then the final, critical moments. The parked car, the charged silence, the touch, the words. Was it just a moment of strange, rain-induced intimacy? A fleeting connection that meant nothing to him? My rational mind, the archivist part of me that dealt in facts and evidence, told me I was building a fantasy out of a simple act of kindness. People say things they don't mean. A touch can be just a touch. But my heart, that long dormant and unreliable organ, insisted otherwise. It insisted that the look in his eyes had been real. The hesitation in his voice had been genuine. The warmth of his hand had been intentional. I swung wildly between these two poles. One moment, I would be filled with a giddy, soaring hope that this could be the beginning of something real. I would imagine what I would say to him the next time I saw him. The next moment, I would be crushed by a wave of self-doubt and fear. I had made it all up. He was probably laughing about the quiet, weird librarian who read way too much into everything. He was avoiding me because he knew I had a crush on him, and he was trying to let me down easy. The tension was unbearable. I saw him twice in the days that followed. The first time, he was walking into the bakery next to the library. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I offered a small, hesitant wave. He just gave a quick, tight-lipped nod and disappeared inside. My heart sank. That was it. I had been right. It was awkward now. I had ruined the simple, distant dynamic we had before. The second time was worse. I was leaving work, and he was across the street, talking to another mechanic. He was laughing, that same deep, easy laugh I had heard so many times from my window. He looked over and saw me. The laugh died on his lips. His expression became serious, almost troubled. He didn't wave. He just watched me walk to the bus stop, my broken-down car still sitting forlornly in the library parking lot. I felt his eyes on me the entire time, a heavy weight on my back. I was convinced I had scared him off. The observer in me had tried to become a participant, and I had failed spectacularly. I resolved to put it out of my mind, to file the memory away like a delicate, unreadable manuscript. It was a beautiful, confusing anomaly, but my life was about routine and order. I would get my car fixed. I would go back to my quiet existence. I would go back to watching the world from a safe distance. It was for the best, I told myself, even as a profound sense of loss settled over me. The grayscale was returning, and the brief splash of color was fading away. 3 days after the ride, on a crisp Friday afternoon, the tension finally broke. I was at my desk in the archives, trying to focus on a set of faded census records from 1920 when my desk phone buzzed. It was Martha from the front desk. "Lucas," she said, her voice holding a note of curiosity. "There's someone here to see you." My stomach plummeted. Visitors were rare in the archives. It was usually just genealogists or local historians who made appointments weeks in advance. Did they have an appointment? I asked, my voice tight. "No," she said. "He just said he needs to talk to Lucas. His name is Caleb." The world tilted on its axis. Caleb. He was here, in the library, asking for me. My hands started to shake. I couldn't breathe. This was it. The confrontation. He was here to tell me to back off, to clear the air, to put an end to the awkwardness I had created. "Okay," I managed to choke out. "Send him down." I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. I smoothed down my sweater, ran a hand through my hair, and waited. I heard footsteps on the metal staircase that led down to the archives. A moment later, he appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He looked completely out of place in the quiet, dusty world of the archives. He was wearing clean jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his chest, his tattooed arms on full display. He looked nervous. His usual easy confidence was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that mirrored my own. He walked slowly toward my desk, his boots making soft sounds on the concrete floor. He stopped a few feet away, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hi," I replied, my own voice a near whisper. We stood there in silence for what felt like a year, the air thick with everything unsaid. He was the one who finally broke it. "Can we talk?" he asked, his hazel eyes pleading. "Somewhere private?" I just nodded, unable to form words. I led him past the rows of shelves to a small, private reading room at the back of the archives, a place I used for handling especially fragile documents. I closed the door behind us, the soft click echoing in the stillness. He didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, looking at the floor. "Lucas, I'm sorry," he started, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry if I've been weird the last few days. I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I braced myself for the rejection. "It's okay," I lied. "You don't have to explain." "No, I do," he insisted, finally looking up at me. His eyes were filled with a sincerity that stole my breath. "That night, in my truck, I messed up. I shouldn't have just left like that." I panicked. He took a step closer. "The truth is, I've been trying to work up the nerve to talk to you for months. I used to make up excuses to come into the library, just hoping I'd run into you." Every word he said dismantled the anxious narrative I had constructed in my head. He had been nervous. He had been trying to talk to me. "I would see you through the window," he continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident. "Sitting at your desk, so focused. I asked Martha your name months ago. I've read half the flyers on the community board just to have a reason to be in the same building as you." A small, incredulous laugh escaped my lips. It was all real. It hadn't been in my head. He took another step, closing the distance between us until we were only inches apart. "When your car broke down, it felt like a sign. It was my chance. But then, when we were sitting there, I got scared. I haven't done this before. With a guy." He looked down, a faint blush coloring his neck. "I thought I read everything wrong. I thought I'd freak you out." "You didn't," I whispered, finding my voice at last. "You didn't freak me out." He looked up, a universe of hope in his eyes. So when I said I didn't want the ride to be over, I didn't want it to be over either. I finished for him, the confession tumbling out of me, a torrent of relief. A slow, beautiful smile spread across Caleb's face. It was the most incredible thing I had ever seen. That night, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur, I offered you a ride home because your car was broken. That was the excuse. But the truth is, I just wanted you. I wanted an excuse to be with you, away from everyone else, just for a little while. He reached out, not hesitating this time, and cupped my face in his warm, calloused hands. His thumbs gently stroked my cheeks. I'm not scared anymore, he whispered. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like the fumbling, uncertain kisses of my youth. This was different. It was a kiss of profound relief, of mutual understanding, of 1,000 unspoken conversations finally having their say. It was gentle at first, a question, and when I kissed him back, deepening the connection, it became a statement. A confirmation. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. So, he murmured, a hint of his usual playful confidence returning. Does the archivist want to get dinner with the mechanic tonight? I laughed, a real, happy, unrestrained sound that echoed through the quiet room. Yeah, I said, my voice full of a certainty I hadn't felt in my entire life. I'd like that very much. In the weeks that followed, my world bloomed with color. The grayscale of my old routine was replaced by a vibrant palette I hadn't known I was missing. Our first dinner turned into a second and a third. We spent hours just talking, unraveling the stories of our lives for each other. I learned that his tough exterior was a shield, protecting a kind and deeply thoughtful man who loved old movies and had a surprising talent for sketching. He learned about my quiet passions, my love for history, and my secret fear that I would spend my life as an observer. He showed me his world of engines and grease, and I was fascinated by the intricate, mechanical dance of it all. He would explain how a transmission worked with the same passion I used to describe the provenance of a 19th century letter. In turn, I showed him my world of silent stacks and whispered histories. He'd come to the archives and sit quietly while I worked, just to be near me. He once spent an entire hour looking at old city maps, completely captivated. He fit into my world, and I fit into his, in a way that felt both surprising and perfectly natural. The small, empty spaces in my life began to fill up. My apartment was no longer just a place for one. It became a place where Caleb's laughter echoed in the evenings, where his ridiculously large boots sat by the door next to my sensible work shoes. My carefully ordered life was joyfully disrupted. He'd show up at the library at closing time, leaning against his truck with that lopsided smile, just to drive me home. It became our ritual. About a month after that first real kiss, we found ourselves parked on my street again, in the exact same spot under the big oak tree where it had all begun. It was a clear, cold night, and the stars were brilliant in the dark sky. We weren't talking. We were just sitting in the comfortable silence that had become our favorite language, my hand resting on his knee this time. He turned to me, his face soft in the dim light from the dashboard. Do you remember how scared I was that first night? He asked quietly. Right here in this spot. I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder. I think I was even more scared, I admitted. I was so sure I had imagined everything. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. Never, he said, turning my face toward his. I was just an idiot who didn't know how to say what he wanted. He kissed me then, a slow, deep kiss full of the easy intimacy we had built. It was a kiss that held the memory of our beginning and the promise of our future. It tasted like certainty. Looking back, it's funny how the biggest changes in your life can hinge on the smallest moments. A dead car battery, a rainy night, a simple offer of a ride home. Before Caleb, I thought my life was meant to be a quiet, solitary story, lived within the safe margins I had drawn for myself. I was the archivist, content to document the lives of others. But he taught me that the most important stories are the ones you're brave enough to live yourself. He pulled me out of the archives and into the world, and for the first time, I felt like a participant in my own life. I learned that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's an invitation. And sometimes, the most terrifying leap of faith is simply accepting a ride from a stranger, trusting that they might just be driving you home.